Is there a formula for human greatness? The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche had one. He sets up a thought experiment in his 1882 book, The Gay Science. What if, some day or night, a demon were to steal into your loneliness and say to you, "This life, as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once again, and innumerable times again, and there will be nothing new in it, but every pain and every joy and every thought and sigh and everything unspeakably small or great in your life must return to you, all in the same succession and sequence. Even this spider and this moonlight between the trees, and even this moment, and I myself, the eternal hourglass of existence is turned over again and again, and you with it, speck of dust." Nietzsche called this idea eternal recurrence. So what would you do if you were caught in the same life, living it over and over again in an infinite loop, exactly how it is now? Nietzsche asks, would you not throw yourself down and gnash your teeth and curse the demon who spoke thus? Or have you once experienced a tremendous moment when you would have answered him, "You are a god, and never have I heard anything more divine"? So your reaction to this thought is going to be hugely telling. Does it sound like the worst idea ever? Or do you love the idea? Would this knowledge crush you or transform you? And will this thought change the way you live your life? Nietzsche thought that these questions are the most important of all. Nietzsche writes that to be great, you need to adore the idea of eternal recurrence. You need to affirm the thought and love life no matter what it brings. You need to have a love of fate, often expressed with the Latin phrase amor fati. Perhaps you've seen the film Groundhog Day. If not, what you need to know is that the legendary Bill Murray is a weatherman named Phil Connors who gets caught in a time loop. Every day, Phil wakes up on February 2nd, Groundhog Day, and relives that same day over and over again. Eternal recurrence is like Groundhog Day. Phil turns the nightmare of eternal recurrence into an opportunity to change himself and his trajectory, and learns to love fate. Fun fact, Nietzsche thought that the eternal recurrence of time was a real thing and could be proven. But as far as we know, Nietzsche was never able to prove it. The point of Nietzsche's idea of eternal recurrence is to encourage us to face life bravely, all of life, the joys and the disappointments, the misery and the anguish and the ugliness. If you recoil in horror at doing that, then you're negating your life because you're not living as vitally as you could be. If you love your life enough to say, "Hell yes, bring it on," then you've found what Nietzsche calls the triumphant yes to life, beyond death and change. So, the formula for human greatness, according to Nietzsche, isn't waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning. It isn't a high-intensity exercise regime. It isn't even positive thinking. The secret, in Nietzsche's words, is that you do not want anything to be different. Not forwards, not backwards, not for all eternity. Accept the world on its own terms as it is. Stop wishing it were otherwise. Take fate into your own hands. Get out there and do something. And think hard about how you're going to live the rest of your life from this moment forth. Live in a way that you would love to live those moments over and over again forever. This is a bitter pill to swallow, especially if you're living a life filled with pain and suffering. Nietzsche would have empathized with you on this one. Nietzsche suffered a lot in exhausting pain for most of his life. He had constant agonizing headaches. Nietzsche's seizures and paralysis made it very difficult for him to read and write and speak. For many hours and sometimes days and nights on end, he writhed with nausea and vomiting, sometimes wishing he were dead. One year, Nietzsche reported that he had spent 200 days in agony. The hotel manager in Sils Maria was convinced that Nietzsche's fruit-eating habits had something to do with his stomach aches. I mean, I'm not qualified to comment on that, but I'd be hesitant to attribute Nietzsche's problems to fruit. Seriously, Nietzsche's suffering wasn't only physical. In March of 1883, Nietzsche wrote to his good friend, Franz Overbeck, "I've lost interest in everything. Deep down, an unyielding black melancholy, and weariness too. Most of the time, I am in bed. The worst of it is, I no longer see why I should live for even half a year or more. Everything is boring, painful, disgusting." I'm sure it didn't help that Nietzsche's brilliance wasn't recognized during his lifetime. In 1869, he became a professor of philology at Basel University. He was only 24 at the time. That's an unheard of young age to become a professor back then, as well as now. But Nietzsche couldn't stand the bureaucratic university life. 10 years later, in 1879, he left academia to focus on his writing. Over his lifetime, Nietzsche's books sold fewer than 500 copies. It put him in a lot of financial difficulty. Nietzsche's publisher wouldn't pay him. He survived on a university pension. Some rich friends helped him out too. Nietzsche doubted himself at times. In the same 1883 letter to Franz Overbeck, he wrote, "I've suffered too much and sacrificed too much. I feel so incomplete, so inexpressibly conscious of having bungled and botched my whole creative life. It's all hopeless. I won't do anything worthwhile again. Why do anything anymore?" And of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, published in volumes between 1883 and 1885, Nietzsche initially called it a folly. He wasn't sure whether it was any good. He wrote, "I myself am incapable of judgment this winter and could be grotesquely mistaken about such things." But the book became very famous posthumously. You might have heard of the phrase, "What doesn't kill me makes me stronger." That's one of Nietzsche's most famous sayings, and he believed it. True to his own philosophy, Nietzsche embraced his illness and loved his fate. He even asserted that being so sick unclogged his mind. Nietzsche said, "I'd long ago have chucked it were it not for my having done the most illuminating psychological and moral research in just this state of suffering and almost absolute renunciation. My joyous thirst for knowledge brings me to heights where I can triumph over all torment and despair." So we should be cautious about romanticizing suffering. Nietzsche doesn't seem to be saying that suffering is good, but for him, pain liberated his spirit. Nietzsche's suffering helped him to tune in to what's important and encouraged him to think more profoundly. Lou Salome, Nietzsche's one-time friend and a philosopher in her own right, said that Nietzsche's work and suffering were inversely related. She said the higher Nietzsche rose as a philosopher toward the full exaltation of life, the lower he fell into suffering as a human being, all in consequence of his own life's teachings. But Nietzsche became confident of his pending fame, even though he suspected it might come after his death. In an 1887 letter to a friend, he wrote, "I've thrown my hook out to the few instead, and even with them, I'm prepared to be patient." and is in his autobiography Ecce Homo, written in 1888 and published posthumously in 1908. My time has not yet come either. Some are born posthumously. The fact that people do not hear me these days, that they do not know how to accept anything I say, these facts are not only understandable, they even strike me as the way things should be. Nietzsche said his work was dynamite. Nietzsche knew that the world wouldn't be ready to hear his ideas until sometime around the year 2000. He wasn't wrong, although towards the very end of Nietzsche's life, people started paying more attention to his work. After he wrote Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he reread it and sobbed. A few copies had been printed, and Nietzsche tried to recall them. He wrote to a friend saying he wanted to protect the book from mishaps. I read it in the last few days and almost died of emotion. It won't be ripe for publishing until after several decades of world historical crises, wars. Nietzsche doesn't say why. He goes on to talk about the excellent weather in Turin. But Nietzsche was right. As mentioned earlier, one of Nietzsche's most famous statements is that God is dead. He wrote it in The Gay Science and in Thus Spoke Zarathustra. The protagonist, Zarathustra, says it, despairing and thinking through what to do about it. Nietzsche said that he could write in one sentence what others took books to write. And that's why he wrote in aphorisms. And it's up to you to figure out what Nietzsche means. I'll make a suggestion, but I challenge you to disagree. God is dead is usually taken to mean that with the Enlightenment, reasoning and science became guiding forces in our lives. And with the popularity of atheism, faith and spirituality faded in importance in how people live their lives on a day-to-day basis. In Nietzsche's view, the problem with this situation is that in the Western world, we have clung to the old Christian value structure. But it's lost so much relevance in the world we live in now. I mean, Christianity still provides many people with direction and comfort in their lives. Think about values inherent in the 10 Commandments or the 7 deadly sins. Consider how we make virtues out of tolerance, modesty, and peacefulness. We reward people for conforming to the status quo and condemn those who don't follow the herd. Nietzsche was disgusted that in his society, and still in ours, we have forgotten the ancient Greek doctrine of power, greatness, and passion, and replaced it with passive Christian values like meekness, obedience, and emotional repression. Now our lives are dominated by outdated values, and we're not thinking about whether they're still relevant to our lives. If religion is no longer how we decide what's right and wrong or good and evil, how should we live? Nietzsche's answer was that we have to create our own values. We have to reevaluate human greatness. And once we're aware of the formula for human greatness, which is amor fati, how do we actually go about it? Nietzsche imagined a heroic individual who accepts that God is dead, creates their own values and morality, loves fate, lives life to the fullest, embraces life on its own terms, and becomes who they are. Such a person is called an Übermensch. Übermensch literally means overhuman or overperson, but is sometimes translated as Superman. We'll stick with Übermensch. The subtitle of Nietzsche's autobiography, Ecce Homo, is How to Become What You Are. The answer, Nietzsche says, is that you need to free yourself from your chains, and then free yourself from your freedom. He writes, each of us, though doubtless in very different ways, has to suffer from chain fever, even after he's broken his chains. We break our chains by willing. Nietzsche says, will, that is the name of the liberator and joybringer. But the will is imprisoned too. We suffocate the will by obsessing over the past. We can't change the past, but wanting to traps us. Nietzsche writes, that is the name of the will's gnashing of teeth and most secret melancholy. Powerless against what has been done, he is an angry spectator of all that is past. Willing provides the means to free ourselves from the internal chains that hold us back, such as fear, shame, self-doubt, and regret. Willing is also the key to freeing ourselves from our freedom. There's always the threat of returning to our chains because they can be comforting. The free spirit must constantly tear themselves away from ties that bind. Nietzsche says that freedom is measured by the resistance which has to be overcome, by the effort it costs to stay aloft. Free spirits constantly challenge themselves, and freedom is defined by the challenges that we face to keep our spirits free. So greatness is about freeing ourselves, not just to be ourselves, but to overcome ourselves, to become our greatest selves. The existentialists later called this movement transcendence. Transcendence, or overcoming, is about striving passionately and creatively to become more than you are, to live your life with urgency and vitality, even if it's uncomfortable. So, what's an Übermensch like? Well, Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra is a fictional story about a real person. Zarathustra, or Zoroaster, was an ancient Persian spiritual leader who probably lived sometime between the 2nd millennium and the 6th century BCE. In Raphael's famous School of Athens painting, Zarathustra appears in the lower corner holding a globe because he was an astrologist. Nietzsche chose Zarathustra as his protagonist because, he said, Zarathustra was the first to see in the struggle between good and evil the essential wheel in the working of things. And he was the greatest truth-teller. Nietzsche also thought Zarathustra was the first psychologist of the good. Nietzsche considered Thus Spoke Zarathustra to be his greatest work and his greatest gift to humankind. He said it was the book that truly captures the atmosphere of high places and an inexhaustible fountain of truth and goodness. The chapter of Nietzsche's autobiography where he talks about Zarathustra is called Why I Write Such Excellent Books. Nietzsche also has a chapter in there called Why I Am So Wise. In Nietzsche's telling, Zarathustra is a recluse who lives in the mountains with an eagle and a snake. But he's tired of being so wise. Zarathustra feels like a bee with too much honey. And he's lonely, not unlike Nietzsche himself. So Zarathustra descends from his hermitage to the nearby town to look for friends, particularly companions who he can teach and who can teach him. He looks for people who are willing to be led astray. He doesn't want followers. He wants to teach people how to beat their own paths, to become what he calls the creators, the harvesters, the celebrants. When Zarathustra reaches the first town after descending from his hermitage, he finds a crowd of people watching a tightrope walker. Zarathustra gets up on his soapbox and explains how to live as an Übermensch. Here we'll focus on just 5 of the many things Zarathustra shares. 1. Know that what is great about human existence is that we are a bridge and not an end. Nietzsche writes that we are like a tightrope stretched between an animal and an Übermensch. One interpretation of this is that our whole life is like the rope and our present existence is like the walker. Existence isn't static, but to be fully human, we must surpass ourselves, to keep putting one foot in front of the other along the bridge towards the ideal of the Übermensch. But also, like the tightrope walker, to live is also to be in danger. The rope of our life hovers over an abyss. It's hazardous to look backwards or down at the abyss below us. It's important to focus on the future, to keep working our way forwards, even if life is, as Zarathustra says, a dangerous shuddering and stopping. Zarathustra admires those who dare. I love those who do not know how to live except by going under, for they are those who cross over. 2, seek knowledge and truth, but also don't forget to be passionate. Greatness involves being able to cultivate and harness our passions and to learn from them, to become better people. Zarathustra says, I love him who has a free spirit and a free heart. Thus, his head is only the entrails of his heart, but his heart drives him to go under. There's nothing worse than someone who is obsessed with rationality, or at the other extreme, someone who lets their passions run out of control. Great people combine rationality with passion, mastering our impulses, but occasionally being intoxicated reveals great character. 3, adopt a lion-like spirit to create new values for yourself. Zarathustra advises to create new values that even the lion cannot do, but the creation of freedom for oneself, for new creation, that is within the power of the lion. The creation of freedom for oneself and a sacred no even to duty. For that, my brothers, the lion is needed. To assume the right to new values, that is the most terrifying assumption for a reverent spirit that would bear much. So Zarathustra is saying, don't be too focused on what your duty is. Break free from the crowd when you need to, and don't be held hostage by other people's demands. 4, Zarathustra urges, 10 times a day you must overcome yourself. That makes you good and tired and is opium for the soul. 10 times you must reconcile yourself again with yourself. For overcoming is bitterness, and the unreconciled sleep badly. 10 truths a day you must find, else you will still be seeking truth by night, and your soul will remain hungry. 10 times a day you must laugh and be cheerful, else you will be disturbed at night by your stomach, this father of gloom. And later in the book, Nietzsche writes that we should consider every day lost on which we have not danced at least once. 5, an Übermensch fights to protect themselves when they need to, but an Übermensch also loves themselves and others voraciously. They're kind and generous. They're lavish and unselfish. Their soul is deep and overflows so much that they can forget themselves. Zarathustra says, I love him whose soul is overfull so that he forgets himself. There's an unconfirmed story about Nietzsche's soul overflowing with so much loving and kindness that he forgot himself that I think is worth sharing. The story goes that while walking one day in Turin in Italy, near the university's gates, Nietzsche saw a man flogging a horse. Nietzsche ran to the horse, put his arms around its neck, and sobbed. Nietzsche was arrested, and when one of Nietzsche's friends walked past and saw what was happening, he convinced the police to release Nietzsche. Whether this incident reflects Nietzsche's lavish compassion or the beginning of Nietzsche's descent into madness will be up to you, but I suspect the former. Just because we can be cruel, just because we can exert our will to power over others, doesn't mean we should. Kindness can be our default attitude. So none of Zarathustra's teachings are easy. Zarathustra advises that you must wish to consume yourself in your own flame. How could you wish to become new unless you had first become ashes? All great things are painful, like the phoenix blazing in its own flames, or like giving birth. But Zarathustra says, one must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. Zarathustra struggles to find people willing to engage with him. The people Zarathustra met while watching the tightrope walker laughed at him. The tightrope walker was listening, but then a fool distracted him and he fell to his death. Zarathustra eventually does find people who can hear his wisdom. Ultimately, they become his followers. But Zarathustra doesn't want followers. He wants people to soak up his wisdom and venture out to live their own lives on their own terms. Zarathustra embodies the notion that the Übermensch is a receding goal. He fights his inner demons on the path towards greatness. And Zarathustra says that eternal recurrence is his most abysmal thought. On one occasion, he is so distraught by the thought that the wretchedness of humanity would eternally recur that it makes him nauseous and he falls into a 7-day coma. When he awakens from the coma, animals around him tell him, everything dies, everything blossoms again, eternally runs the year of being. The animals accept what Zarathustra struggles to, that eternal recurrence is an opportunity for change, for growth, and for all of humanity to do better in the future, no matter what horrors have manifested in the past. Zarathustra is great because he faces reality head-on, amidst life's terrors and uncertainties, and sees reality lucidly. We can all strive to be Übermenschen if we want to. Nietzsche suggests that human nature is driven by the will to power. Some of us use our will to power more than others. Some of us master it better than others. Some harness their will to power and direct it towards goodness, truth, and creativity. Others use it for evil. In The Gay Science, Nietzsche writes that using our power for kindness is much better than doing bad things. The state in which we hurt others is certainly seldom as agreeable as that in which we benefit others. It is a sign that we are still lacking power, or it betrays a frustration in the face of this poverty. It brings new dangers and uncertainties to the power we do possess and clouds our horizon with the prospect of revenge, scorn, punishment, failure. One of the best ways to direct our will to power is towards overcoming ourselves. Zarathustra provokes us to construct our own life bridges or tightropes and our own goals, not to be obedient followers. This is why Nietzsche wrote that the Übermensch is a longing for a future destination. Is there an example of an Übermensch in real life? Well, the simple answer is no. Nietzsche did suggest that people like Julius Caesar, Leonardo da Vinci, the Greek poet Homer, and the German poet Johann Wolfgang von Goethe might come close. They were great creators and free spirits. But Nietzsche intentionally doesn't give us examples of an Übermensch. It wouldn't be great of us to follow in anyone else's footsteps. This attitude is a direct critique of the cliché, you can't be it if you can't see it. Sure, seeing what someone else is doing can be inspiring, but it's just the beginning. And trying to be too much like our role models limits our imaginations. So, back to the eternal recurrence thought experiment. What if you had to live your life exactly the same over again and again? What does the thought suggest to you about the way you've lived your life up until now? And looking to the future, what will you try to do better in this life? What will you let go of? What have you done to surpass yourself lately? How might you challenge yourself to stretch yourselves towards the ideal of the Übermensch? In what ways might you take Zarathustra's teachings on board? Bill Murray's character in Groundhog Day seems to get this lesson and improves himself until he's worthy of being his best self. If the people you know in this life are going to infinitely return to you, it will be helpful to have a good understanding about how to make those connections great. In the next lecture, we'll dive into what Nietzsche says about great relationships.